Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a new craft project, but this video is a little different than usual. A bit further on, I'm going to talk about something a little more personal, something that I know many of you may relate to. As I've grown older, especially in my 50s and 60s, I've found myself looking back at certain patterns in my life with a new kind of clarity. For years, I just thought I was quirky, odd, overly sensitive, or too focused on certain things, while completely overwhelmed by others. I thought everyone experienced the world this way, but as more conversations open up around neurodivergence, autism, ADHD, and other ways our brains can work differently, I began recognizing pieces of myself that I never had a language for before. Many women of my generation slipped through the cracks. We were encouraged to mask, to adapt, to be good, to hold everything together without ever questioning why it sometimes felt so hard. And for some of us, discovering neurodivergence in later life isn't about labeling ourselves, it's about understanding ourselves. It's about kindness, connection, and letting go of old stories that never quite fit. So, as we settle into today's craft, I want this space to be a gentle reminder that creativity is a wonderful refuge and an amazing way to express the parts of ourselves we've kept tucked away. Whether you're here for the project, the conversation, or just a bit of company, I'm really glad that you are here. Let me just explain how this video is structured so you can choose to jump to whatever part you want. First, I am going to briefly show you the new printable. Then I am going to address the issue of how to find my free printables, and this is in light of a comment I received this week that tells me some of you are still having trouble finding them. Then I'm going to move into the part where I demonstrate how I made this bracelet using my free design, and it's at that point I'm going to discuss the very hot topic of neurodivergence, particularly undiagnosed autism and ADHD in my generation. I am going to discuss diagnosed versus undiagnosed versus self-diagnosed, because there is a huge amount of controversy around these areas at the moment, and I have some very strong feelings about the whole issue of diagnosis, and I'm going to face that in this video. I have felt very strongly about this for many years, and I can no longer stay quiet. My hope is that many of you will identify with what I have to say and use the comments to tell your own stories. This video is quite a long one, so if you are someone who doesn't like a lot of talking, then please just turn the sound off and the subtitles on. So yes, wow, I was really pleased with these, really pleased with the way this design turned out. And this is the current free printable that you can all get if you go over to my website www.funcraftstodoathome.com, and I've made this so that it is printer ink friendly. You'll notice I've taken the black out of the middle so that you don't waste any black ink. And yeah, there'll be a link in the description underneath this video so that you can go straight over to my website and find the link to my Google Drive where all of my free printables are stored. And if you're not clear on how to get my free printables, watch the video coming up on the screen now, where you will get a full explanation exactly how to get my free printable. And once you're over there watching that video, this is some of what you're going to see. But I'm not going to give an explanation here because I've already done that over on the other video. And the reason that I made that video in the first place was because occasionally I will get somebody in the comments complaining that they're finding it really difficult to try and find my free printables. And I had a lady yesterday in the comments complaining that trying to find free printables on my website is like going on a scavenger hunt. Now, I accept that it can be difficult, not just on my website, but on websites in general, that have Google ads on them, I accept that it can be really difficult to find what you're looking for, because it's sometimes very hard to tell the difference between what is the content and what is the advertising. I get that, because I have the same problem when I go onto people's websites. But the thing is, my printables are free. I don't want to charge for them. I'm quite happy to give my designs away for free. But that means I do need to have advertising on my website, and I make no apology for that. The only other option that I have is to put my designs over on my Etsy shop, because I do have an Etsy shop, and start charging for them. But I don't think the majority of my viewers want that. So that is my only other option. But to be honest, I don't think there's enough people out there that are having a difficult time finding my free printables to justify me doing that. And it's certainly not what I want. Based on that video that I put up in September, in which I explained step by step, and you can see some of it coming up on the screen now, based on this video, the feedback that I got from people was the majority of you don't have any problem finding my free printables. It does only seem to affect a very small number of people, and I do wonder if it's, related to a particular device, like, possibly people that are trying to find them on a mobile phone. I'm not sure, but the majority of people did not have a problem finding my printables, and they appreciate the free printables. But every now and then this comes up. I will get a comment saying, "Oh, I can't find your free printables." Like this woman said, it's like a scavenger hunt. And some people have even said that they've been asked for money to download the free printable. Well, I've lost count of how many times I've said to people, I don't charge for my free printables, they are free. So knowing that, if you click on something on a website and it takes you through to a payment page, then you need to click away from that, because you've obviously clicked on an advert instead of my link. You need to take your time and make sure that you find my link, and if you're not sure, then you need to watch this video. I've put a link up here again in the top right hand corner where you can go and find that video. I think the internet has been around long enough now for us all to be aware that the internet is the wild west of advertising, and it's down to us, each one of us, to be careful what we're clicking on. And I have tried to make it as clear as I possibly can how to get my free printables. So once again, I am asking in the comments, please can you tell me what your experience has been with finding and downloading my free printables? I'd be really grateful. I know I asked you to do that in September and many of you did respond, but please could you do it again, because I have had a couple more of these comments, only a couple, so it's not serious, but I would love to know what your experience is. Thank you. And besides the links that I have put on the screen throughout this section, I will also put a link in the description underneath this video so that you can go to the full version of what you're seeing on the screen right now, with me giving the full step-by-step instructions. To skip the intro and get straight to the instructions, you need to start the video about 3 or 4 minutes in. Okay? Everyone clear? I hope so. I have to say, I've got an absolutely lovely bunch of regular viewers, and 99.9% of the comments that I get from them are very, very positive. So thank you everyone for that. I really appreciate it. And thanks too to the viewers that have had problems finding the free printables but have been really kind about it in the comments. I really don't mind helping those people at all, because I know for some people they may not be as tech savvy as others, and I'm quite happy to help those people. Okay, so on with the tutorial for the Mexi beads. It's time to move on now to the part of the video where I demonstrate how to use the printable to make the memory wire bracelet. So as I said at the beginning of this video, the format is slightly different this time because I want to talk to you about a subject that is very close to my heart, and I know from what I've seen on social media is close to the hearts of many people in my generation. So I'm not actually going to be giving you much of a running commentary on what I'm doing on screen, because a large majority of you are regular viewers anyway, and you've seen me do this many times. There are moments when I will break off to tell you what is going on the screen, but for the most part I am going to be talking about this very important subject because I know that it has affected the lives of so many of us, and there is a huge amount of injustice going on that we need to try and put a stop to. But in the UK, the whole issue of neurodiversity is a very hot topic right now. And it's a hot topic for two very important reasons. At one end of the scale, you've got children who come under the SEND umbrella, that's Special Educational Needs and Disabilities, and any parent or grandparent of a child right now with SEND issues will tell you what an absolute mess the support system is in. And so this is a very hot topic amongst SEND parents, many of whom are at the end of their tethers with the system. And at the other end of life, you have us, older people who are undiagnosed neurodivergent, struggling to come to terms with what the education system did to us and the lifelong effect it had on our mental health. Unfortunately, the neurotypical world doesn't seem to want to connect the two, what's happening to children now and what happened to us as children back in the 60s. I'm well aware that it didn't begin with us in the 60s, but we are the generation now that is making up the elderly population, and we are the only ones left alive that can talk about the experiences we had at the hands of the education system that didn't understand us, and how, for many of us, it negatively impacted our whole lives. It almost seems like there's an epidemic of people in their later years being diagnosed with neurodiverse conditions, and they are taking to social media to talk about the relief they feel at finally understanding what was wrong with them, why they didn't fit in, and why their lives have been so difficult and traumatic. So why am I talking about this to you on a crafting channel? Well, I am one of those women who spent their lives not fitting in and suffering severe emotional problems from around age 7 because of it, and because of the awful treatment I suffered at the hands of the neurotypical adults around me as I grew up. But unlike many of those people that I see on social media who are just now getting their diagnoses, I actually had my awakening to the likelihood that I was on the autistic spectrum and also had the kind of brain that is labelled as ADHD back in the early 2000s when I had a major career change. I don't want to dwell too much on the circumstances surrounding how I came to know I was neurodivergent, because I want to get into the main reason I am talking to the crafting community about such an off-the-wall, non-craft issue. I think for now it's enough to say I changed careers from working in press and PR, photography and journalism for 30 years to going into a new career in education, and in doing so I ended up having to study for qualifications, one of which was in the area of social, emotional and behavioural difficulties. Before that I knew little to nothing about autism, and I don't think I'd heard of ADHD until then. And my knowledge of autism was so bad, I thought if a person was autistic, they were totally in a world of their own, completely unable to function normally, and were unable to look after themselves. What I learned in my studies was a shock. I had no idea that autistic people can be high functioning and be living normal lives. And slowly, as time went on, the realization crept over me that everything I was learning explained a hell of a lot about my state of mind and the horrendous childhood experiences that led to very severe emotional problems that carried over into my adult life. My school reports alone, right through to the end of my schooling, point to the traits and behaviour of a neurodivergent child. I was constantly called a scatterbrain, a daydreamer who couldn't concentrate, but back in the early 2000s, no one was talking about undiagnosed autism and ADHD in mature adults. And I felt very alone with this new knowledge that was dawning on me. It took years for me to process and reframe my childhood experiences through the lens of neurodivergence. And I went through some very turbulent emotions, which eventually turned into anger, sadness, and resentment. But as I struggled to make sense of my early life, the struggle with depression in my teens, my 2 divorces, and many relationships, and struggles with bullying at work, something strange was beginning to happen. I'm just going to break off for a few minutes here to tell you what I'm doing on screen. My regular viewers will know that I am fanatical about colouring the edges of my paper bead strips. So for anyone who's new to paper bead making, this is why. You see the end of this bead is all blue? Well, if I didn't colour the edges, there would be a white spiral around the ends here. And then this is the other thing that I do to prevent the core hole from the bead from being white. And you can see my marker is actually running out. I think I need to get some new markers. This step in the paper bead making process does take a bit of time, but it is really worth it. You don't have to do it. You can make paper beads without doing this, but I just prefer the look of the beads without that white spiral. And to be honest, I really enjoy doing this while I'm listening to an audiobook. It's very relaxing and almost meditational in a way. I find my mind does relax quite a bit when I get into the rhythm of doing all these strips like this. So if you have the ADHD type brain, you might find this very relaxing as well. Now, where was I? Oh yeah, so as I was struggling to make sense of my early life, something strange was starting to happen on social media. Undiagnosed autism in older adults, particularly women my age, was being talked about. There were a growing number of women coming out and saying they finally understood themselves and they were desperate to get a definite diagnosis from the NHS. Now, I've never wanted a formal diagnosis, and I never will, and I'll tell you why. I have so much anger towards the system, the establishment, for the horrific way I was treated between the ages of 7 and 15 by the neurotypical world. There is no way on this earth I am going back to that same machine and asking for their opinion. Autism and ADHD are just labels that the neurotypical people use for their own convenience. Why on earth would I go back to the very type of people who damaged me 60 years ago and ask for their judgment of my brain? Because we know now that when neurodivergent children are constantly emotionally abused, day in, day out, by an education system that does not cater for their very different needs, but instead traumatizes them on a daily basis, their nervous systems actually change to try and cope with the stress of it all, which is precisely where chronic post-traumatic stress disorder in childhood comes from. Being constantly misunderstood, criticized, and humiliated just for being who you are is extremely toxic to the nervous system. I still haven't come to terms with what happened to me as a child, the horror of what I lived with and kept to myself until I met Gary, my husband, at age 45, will never leave me. And I know it will never stop affecting how I see life, because my nervous system, like many other people out there, was tuned to be on high alert, and nothing will ever change that now. But with that knowledge about myself came awareness, and I've been able to deal with this, particularly in the last year, by just avoiding 90% of people, because to me, people equal pain. In particular, neurotypical people, because I find them really hard to deal with. And even now, at the age I am now, and possibly lots of you out there will be able to identify with this, I still see people looking at me sideways because I've said or done something that they don't understand. People will say to me, "Oh, you're an overthinker, you overthink everything." Well, what I do now to counteract that is I avoid underthinkers. Just let that sink in. We're not overthinkers. You're only an overthinker in the world of an underthinker. Do you get me? So I avoid underthinkers and people that just go with the flow. And so that means avoiding 95% of the population. But I'm happy with the circle of people that I have around me, because we are all neurodivergent, we're all odd, and we kind of revel in our oddness, really. So, yeah, there's that. So, my question is, what happens to children like me in this day and age? Because, my goodness, it's still going on even now. In this age of neurodiversity awareness, autistic children are still being treated badly in school. They're being punished for misdemeanors that are a behavioural reaction to injustice and not having their needs met. What happens is the neurodiversity itself isn't the problem. The problem is the very poor mental health that develops as a result of not being understood by the neurotypical world, the lack of self-esteem, and the constant fear of living in a world that doesn't accept us but keeps punishing us just for existing as we are. So who the hell knows where neurodiversity ends and mental health problems begin? Because neurodiversity itself isn't, in my opinion, a disorder. The neurodiverse brain has been a very necessary part of human evolution. We are a type of human that functions differently to the neurotypical brain, but society conveniently ignores that fact and deems us as disordered. So there is no way that I want a piece of paper from the establishment with their diagnosis of me on it. So why am I telling you all this? Well, I think that there are so many of us who are in the crafting world who do have the brain that is labelled by the neurotypical world as being ADHD, and there's probably many of us as well who are on the autistic spectrum. Now, I know from the analytics in the back end of YouTube, I know that many of my viewers are around the same age group as me. There obviously are younger people that watch this channel as well, but many of you are older. And so alongside your own possible neurodivergence, whether diagnosed or undiagnosed, I suspect many of you will have grandchildren and other family members, maybe your own children, maybe your own adult children, that may have differences that are labelled by the neurotypical world as neurodivergent, and you may well be witnessing the problems that they are having within the education system now, even though we are supposed to be a lot more aware and a lot more tolerant of differences. I know from what I see on social media that there is an awful lot of suffering going on out there at the moment, still going on. And in some ways I do wonder if it's even worse than what we went through, because they're given these labels by the neurotypical world. I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't any neurodivergent people that are working in the area of SEND in schools, but in my experience there weren't many. I worked with some horrendous people that were neurotypical, that hadn't got a clue what neurodiverse children go through. And so I do wonder what it feels like for a child in school now to have that label, to know that they have that label, and then still be mistreated by the neurotypical world. It really does upset me that this is still going on and that not much has changed. And I think that it's down to those of us that did suffer in the system to talk about how not being understood affected us. I think people need to wake up and listen to the experiences of people who are now in their later years. They need to listen to what our experiences were of being mistreated in school, well, and in life in general, because it didn't stop when we left school for many of us. Many of us ended up having problems in the workplace because the way we are is just not understood. And we do know that mental health problems amongst children are that they've reached epidemic proportions now, and there's just not the help out there for these young people. And I do believe that a lot of the mental health problems that are out there are probably caused by this lack of understanding that comes from the neurotypical world of people that are different and have different needs in the way they learn, in the way they perceive the world, in the way they feel things. We know all this because we've lived through this. And I think as long as we stand by and watch the system constantly changing things in the world of special educational need, they change things, they keep changing the way they name things, the way they label things. It's about as useful as rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic would have been. But as long as you've got neurotypical people trying to make neurodivergent children fit within the system, we are going to have problems, and we are going to keep on producing generation after generation of people that have got mental health problems because they're square pegs that would not fit in the round holes that the establishment wants them to fit in. So you have a situation where, yes, the child is diagnosed as being a square peg, but the system still wants it to fit into a round hole. And until society starts to provide square holes for these children to fit comfortably into, we're going to continue to have problems, and I don't think things will change until there are more neurodivergent people making the decisions about what should happen in education for neurodivergent children. Okay, so back to the tutorial for a moment. Anyone who hasn't made paper beads before, I'm using a paper bead roller here, and if you want to know how to make your own paper bead roller, I'm going to put a link to a video up in the right hand corner now. You can go and watch that video and find out all about how to make your own paper bead rolling tool. So going back to the neurodivergent subject, I think those of us that do understand what is going on, those of us that are worried about our children, our grandchildren, we need to be writing about our experiences on our blogs. We need to be doing podcasts. We need to be getting the word out there in our art, in whatever it is we do, whatever it is we're good at. We need to be talking about this, making it mainstream, because there are so many parents that are suffering and watching awful things happen to their children, and goodness knows what is coming in the future for those children. So that's why I am speaking out here. There's many of us in the crafting community. You know what we're like. I don't need a psychologist to tell me that I have ADHD. If a psychologist came to my house now and took a really good look around, they'd be able to diagnose me with ADHD without me even being in the house. All they'd need to do is have a look in the cupboards and the drawers and the plastic boxes and see the sheer volume of craft stuff that I have. And what I'm showing you here isn't even half of what I actually have, because I've got loads more stuff downstairs in the house, and I've got loads more stuff in an outbuilding. So all of these boxes are crammed with all different crafts that I've been into, that I am still into. There's just everything imaginable. I don't ever really need to go to a craft store now because I've got so much stuff. I could probably keep on crafting until I die, and I still won't use up all the stuff that I have. The ideas never stop, my mind is never still, I'm always doing something, and I go down so many different creative avenues. There just isn't enough time left in my life to do all the things that I have in my head. So I'm not sorry that I have a brain like this, as I'm sure most other crafters out there that can relate to this, I'm sure you probably enjoy having a brain like this too, because we're never bored. I will never be bored. I never ever sit around wondering what I'm going to do with the day. The days are never long enough. I get annoyed, especially at this time of year, because the days are so short, and it kind of annoys me that I have to go to sleep. And the really sad thing is this is exactly what I was like as a child. This is what seemed to wind everyone up, because I was always on the go. I was always coming up with ideas. I wanted to draw things, make things, write stories, perform plays, anything creative. And gradually it was just repressed out of me. And I can remember it happening. I can remember giving up. And so I just used to sit and daydream about the things that I wanted to do. The ideas didn't stop coming, and I can remember constantly getting yelled at in the classroom. And one of the things that they used to yell at me is, Gillian, get back to your seat. You're out of your seat again. And that was all the time. Because whatever they gave me to do was never, ever as interesting as the things that went on in my head and the things that I wanted to try out on my own. And I know how badly it affects me in my adult life. If for any reason I can't do anything creative for a few days, I start to get withdrawal symptoms. And I'm not joking when I say that. I need to create. And so I know what it would have done to me as a child. The fact that my creativity was very, very seriously repressed. I quite often watch videos on YouTube of other crafters, and I think, yep, you've got the ADHD brain, and I hope you're really proud of it, because there's so many really creative people out there whose brains are just constantly pinging with new ideas, and that is the upside. This is the joy of being neurodivergent. Our minds never stop inventing, planning, visualizing, experimenting, seeing, feeling. We never rest. Even in bed our minds are busy thinking, what if I did this? What if I did that? And we get out of bed and we go and try it. That is why we don't live in caves anymore, because people like us saw beyond caves and said, what if we do this? What if we do that? And so here we are, with houses, light and heat, and no wild animals sniffing around the cave. That's us. Our neurodivergent ancestors gave us these things through their curiosity, their drive, and their inability to sit still for long. What I want from you is, are you a restless soul, always crafting, always doing, always thinking? Were you a misfit at school? Did you suffer? Does it still affect you? And if you were affected and you are undiagnosed as yet, do you really want the piece of paper from a neurotypical stating what is wrong with you? I saw a woman today on social media. I wish I'd kept the link, but I don't remember who she was. She looked so tired and so worn out, and she was saying that after a lifetime of being different, left out, struggling to fit in and be included, she isn't even allowed to have the relief of self-diagnosing neurodiversity to help her make sense of her struggles. Instead, she was saying that people tell her, oh, you just want a label, you just want the attention, and the neurotypicals just continue their abuse. I've had the same thing said to me, even by members of my own family. You can't diagnose, you can't self-diagnose, you can't just say you're neurodiverse. Why can't I? What are you? Oh, I'm normal, they say. What, you're neurotypical, are you? And they'll say, well, yes, I am. And who diagnosed you as neurotypical? And they laugh and they say, you don't need a diagnosis if you're normal. So I need to ask someone else for permission to call myself neurodiverse, but you can just randomly diagnose yourself as neurotypical. What utter BS. So let me just get this straight. Many of us have lived our lives being labelled and called names by neurotypical people. So I said to you before, the main one that I got called was scatterbrain. There was a whole long list of other names. Fusspot was another one. And these weren't psychologists that I'm talking about. These were just people, family members, teachers, anyone who decided that they were going to have an opinion on this child who was different to the mainstream. So, It was fine for them to put labels on us without any diagnosis. Oh, I'm going to call you scatterbrain, right? So we've had to live with these labels put on us by unqualified people for years and years and years. And now that we live in an age where it's much easier to understand ourselves, those very same people are telling us that we are not allowed to label ourselves. I mean, it's just crazy. So you can look at me and tell me I am a scatterbrain, but when I turn around and look at you and say, no, I'm not a scatterbrain, I have a brain that has been labelled as ADHD, you tell me no, I have to stick with the scatterbrain label. Nah, it doesn't work that way. The neurotypical world needs to... I don't want to use the term on here because I don't know how many people would be offended by profanity, but you know what I want to say. 2 words. Foxtrot Oscar. That's what the neurotypical world needs to do as far as I am concerned. So, yeah, we need to start speaking up for our children, for our grandchildren. We need to speak out in whatever way we can. We need to speak out for the children that we were. And until things change, and I don't think they're going to change anytime soon, we need to give our children and our grandchildren the strength to survive the education system and come out of it with who they are intact and not feeling ashamed of who they are. That is what my passion is. This is what we need to do. We need to speak out in whatever way we can. So just to explain briefly what I am doing on the screen here, I'm using these paint sticks, which I have used in previous videos. If you want to go back and have a look at how I used them in other videos, I'm using them here on the paper bead strips that were what I call the skeleton strips. When you cut your beads out from the printable that I've given you, you will get these in-between strips, which I always say don't throw away because you can use them to make spacer beads. Well, in this video I intended to use the spacer beads in the bracelet that I made, but as it turned out I didn't use the spacer beads. I just put them into my bead stash because I wanted to use much smaller beads on the bracelet, and so this is what I am doing here. I'm just colouring the white strips, but I don't use the beads. So where were we? Oh yeah, we need to speak up in whatever way we can, and we need to get over this issue of official diagnosis versus self-diagnosis. As much as anyone out there has the right to call themselves normal or neurotypical, we have the right to recognize ourselves as not being neurotypical. And after a lifetime of emotional abuse and lack of understanding, we need and we deserve the relief of understanding ourselves through the neurotypical lens. But the neurotypical world doesn't even want us to have that luxury. They want to deny us the right to decide for ourselves, and we need to suffer the final indignity of having the neurotypical world decide and diagnose us. Well, for anyone out there who is finally coming to understand what not fitting in was all about, this is our time. We can live whatever years we have left being proud of being different. We've already wasted too many years trying to march to the neurotypical beat, and why I will never know, because I am so thankful that I am not like those who I struggled for acceptance from. I see now many of them were bland, they were beige, they were vanilla, while we are all the colours of the rainbow. And yes, we can proclaim we are neurodivergent. We don't need your permission. Even the Disability Discrimination Act in the UK does not require an official diagnosis of autism or ADHD for us to be protected by the Act. Now that should tell you something. Oh, and by the way, we don't have an attention deficit. We can concentrate for hours and days even on things we find value in, things we are interested in. And unlike neurotypical people, we don't waste time on stuff that doesn't float our boat. So maybe we are the healthy ones. Maybe it's the neurotypical world that has the problem, who knows? Please tell me in the comments, are you an adult in later life who is diagnosed, undiagnosed or self-diagnosed with a neurodivergent condition? Is it still affecting your life? I feel so strongly about the injustice of what I lived through that I have abandoned many people this year. I just don't want to be around neurotypical people anymore, or no more than I have to now. I want peace, self-acceptance, and when you accept yourself, you don't need acceptance from them. They say we are blunt, but my goodness, the neurotypical world can be so rude and so blunt when it comes down to giving their opinion on how we are. Like I said before, how many times I've been accused of being an overthinker. And in my experience, it's always something that is said by people that are quite dull, that just go with the flow, that don't question anything. So yes, they are going to look at people like us and think that we are overthinkers. I've got absolutely no regrets about how my mind works. I think what many neurotypicals call overthinking is actually just thinking. Or perhaps it's just deeper thinking than most of the mainstream people do. And I'm not even sure why the neurotypical world concerns itself with what other people are thinking. I really don't understand that. It almost feels as if they're threatened by it in some way. They want you to be thinking on their level and no deeper. I don't know. I'd love to know what your experience is and what you think. Have you ever been called an overthinker? And another favourite of the neurotypical world is to say, oh, you ask so many questions. And that was the problem when I was a child. That was what used to really wind teachers up. With the way I am, I need crystal clear clarity all the time. So I will ask questions about things that your average person may not bother with. I need to confirm things. I need to make sure that I have understood what is said. And what I've found is that doesn't really go down too well in the world. It's fine if you're doing that with people that are also neurodivergent because they get it. And there's never a problem. When I'm dealing with my neurodivergent friends, there's never any problem. But in the past, I've had people accuse me of being argumentative, and when all I am doing is seeking clarity, and I will keep on asking questions until I have that clarity. So yeah, that's another thing that has kind of plagued me in my life. And so you end up thinking, well, is it me? Do I ask too many questions? And maybe you then stay quiet when you really don't understand something. So there we are. That's what I wanted to say about neurodivergence. Oh yeah, and the other thing we often get accused of is this no eye contact issue. Apparently, autistic people can't make eye contact. Well, that isn't strictly true in my experience. I work with many children who couldn't make eye contact, but once they felt emotionally safe in my sessions, they made eye contact like any other child. In fact, there would usually be a defining moment when the penny dropped that they could safely lower their emotional guard, and their whole body would turn towards me in that moment, not just their eyes, and the connection was secure. One of the things that often got yelled at me as a child was, "Will you look at me when I'm talking to you?" Well, a huge part of why autistic people don't make eye contact, in my opinion and my experience, is because of the deep perception we tend to have about people. There also seems to be a very high degree of sensitivity. I know I am a highly sensitive person and I am highly perceptive. I would go as far as to call it extrasensory perception. And if I look in your eyes and I see that familiar look of disapproval, I'm going to stop looking at people. You learn very quickly as a child, if you're different, how to avoid the non-verbal signs of rejection in others. And the main one is to avoid eye contact because it's painful. I have no problem making direct eye contact with people I trust. And when I'm not making eye contact with people, I'm fully aware of it, and I will try and flicker my eyes towards theirs briefly, but I can't hold it. Okay, so back to the tutorial for a moment. I'm now about to seal my beads with this Anita's clear gloss because I've run out of dimensional magic, and I absolutely love Anita's clear gloss anyway. It's very similar to dimensional magic. One of the reasons that I sometimes avoid using wet sealers with inkjet printed paper bead strips, with a wet sealer you can sometimes smudge the print. So what you'll see here with me glazing these beads, I'm being extra careful with the very first coat. I'm just getting it on there with minimal strokes, getting it on there really quickly just to get a first coat on, and once that coat is dry you can then spend more time putting a couple more coats on and taking more time over it. You just need to seal that ink in. And just listen to how solid they sound once you've got 2 or 3 coats of Anita's gloss on there. It's very, very glossy and shiny, and it really does protect the beads. It's not going to make them waterproof, but it's going to make them splash proof. And this is called memory wire for making bracelets, so that's memory wire. And I much prefer this method of making bracelets to using elastic now. So I have got some of this in my Amazon shops, so that's Amazon UK and Amazon.com, and you'll find direct links to this over on my blog. And as I said, there's a link to my blog in the description underneath this video. Now normally I would cut off the number of loops that I want for a bracelet, but because I made lots of beads and I wasn't really sure how many I was going to need for one bracelet in terms of how many wire loops I would need, so I didn't actually cut the wire to begin with. I started to thread the beads onto the entire wire strand, which was quite clumsy. Normally you wouldn't do that, you'd normally know. I mean, I made a couple of these, and the second one I knew that I needed just over 4 loops, or was it 3? I can't remember. 3.5 loops, something like that. And it was much easier to make once I'd cut the loops off that I needed, so just bear that in mind. You wouldn't normally use memory wire like this. I probably wouldn't do this again. Next time I would just probably cut 4 loops off. I think I was concerned about wasting memory wire, but as it turned out, I don't think I would have wasted any memory wire if I'd have cut, even if I cut 5 loops off and just wasted a tiny bit, you know, would have been fine. This was a really clumsy way to do it, so don't be put off using memory wire watching me struggle to get these these beads on this enormous length of wire. So back to where I was before. Yeah, so sometimes I know that I don't make eye contact with people, and when that happens I know I don't feel any rapport with them, and I need to protect myself from what I will see in their eyes if I look for too long. Non-acceptance. When you're a child, having that acute perception is deeply painful, and so you just stop making eye contact with anyone. It isn't a conscious decision, it just happens. And as an adult now, I use it as a way of gauging whether someone is emotionally safe to be around, and I swiftly move on from people that my psyche is telling me I can't look at with confidence. So instead of constantly pointing out to neurodivergent children that they have this deficit, that they're not able to make eye contact, perhaps the neurotypical world needs to start understanding what is different about neurodivergent people that makes it very painful sometimes to maintain eye contact. Perhaps we should start telling these children that that is fine, that they need to listen to their intuition, and maybe the people that they're having trouble maintaining eye contact with need to look at themselves and ask themselves, why does this child feel so uncomfortable with me? He or she doesn't want to look at me. How can I adjust my behaviour to make this child feel more comfortable in my presence? And although this is more of a neurodivergent trait, we do see this in the neurotypical world as well, because how many times have you been told something by somebody that was an uncomfortable experience for them, and you say to them, wow, how did you deal with that? And they'll say something like, well, I just couldn't bring myself to look at him. Do you see what I mean? It's when you're feeling uncomfortable for whatever reason, it's quite normal to look away from people, and I think in neurodivergent people, we just have that stronger instinct. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with that. Right, so here I am using looping pliers to make a loop in the end of the wire to stop the beads from falling off. Now, I'm not an expert at this, so, you know, it looks quite clumsy the way that I am doing this. If you look up, I'll see if I can find a video to leave a link in the description below of somebody that's doing this expertly. But you just have to practice to get it right, to use these looping pliers the right way. And if you can't get any looping pliers around where you live, have a look on my website, because I do leave links to the things that I use. So if you do need to get them from online, I will leave links there that you can go and have a look at. So my final thoughts on this whole thing about eye contact. If you're talking to somebody and they're looking past you or doing anything they can not to make eye contact with them, just instead of looking and thinking, oh, you must be autistic, just think to yourself, what am I doing that is making this person feel uncomfortable? Am I unconsciously judging them? Am I unconsciously giving out disapproval that they're picking up and feeling uncomfortable about? Do I need to adjust my behaviour to make them feel more comfortable? What do you need to change to be more trustworthy to this child and be worthy of their eye contact? It's just too easy to not see beyond the label of autism and try to understand, or for neurotypical people anyway, and try to understand what it actually means to be autistic and why possibly some of the traits that we see in autism, why do they exist? Is autism a disorder, or is it just a fact that people that are said to have autism have extrasensory perception that can be very painful in this world? Whether it's loud noises, whether it's the way people look at you, whatever it is, do we have to just assume that it is a disorder? Because it seems to me that anything the neurotypical world doesn't understand, it's just easier for them to slap a label on it, and then they don't even have to try and understand it because, oh no, it's a disorder, we need to try and cure it. You need to try and fit in. We need to knock the corners off your squareness so that you can fit into the round hole. And I want to make it crystal clear here, I'm not talking about levels of autism that render a person to be low functioning in life to the point of disability. I'm talking about high functioning neurodivergent people who may appear to be like everyone else, but who struggle to fit in. And that's because we march to a different drum than the majority of society. The oddballs, the eccentrics, the quirky people. And I'm quite sure that I probably speak for anyone who has reached their later years and suddenly had the revelation of exactly why they've never fitted in. I'm quite confident that most of us actually appreciate the way we are now because, as I said before, we're never going to be bored. If you turn and accept yourself, particularly if you are highly creative, we just will never be bored, and we don't have to spend our lives looking outwards, wondering why people don't accept us. Look at the people who do accept us and look inside for the treasures that we have inside of us and all the wonderful things that go on inside our heads. Because mine is like a constant, I don't know how to put it. It's like having a butterfly that lives in my head that is constantly leading me to new ideas and new things. And yeah, it can be tedious when you get up in the morning and you've got all this stuff on your mind that you want to do today, all this wonderful creative stuff that you want to get done. But there's mundane things like you've got to make the bed, you've got to pick up dirty clothes, you've got to do laundry, you've got to tidy up the kitchen, whatever. And so you start on one task and your mind is elsewhere, and you find yourself with these boring tasks. You start one, you don't finish it, you start another one, you don't finish it. And I see loads of people online kind of making fun of themselves for being this way, and I know what that's like because my husband laughs at me all the time in a friendly way. And that's him right there, just down the lane there, being patient because I keep stopping to take pictures of, well, anything really, anything I find that I think is arty that I can use in collage or whatever. My husband is fantastic. He totally gets the way my brain is, and to be honest, I think he thinks, and I think he's probably slightly OCD, which is great. It's a great combination because he picks up my slack, and I think if it wasn't for him, I think I'd be living in total chaos because I can't be bothered with housework. It just doesn't interest me. I will do it if I've got people coming over. I will have a blitz on the house and get everything looking, tidy and well, the house is clean anyway because my husband keeps it clean, but the tidiness is difficult because I do tend to leave a trail of craft debris from room to room. But I do try. I do try for his sake to keep things reasonably tidy. But yeah, it's having the ADHD brain in this day and age it's not easy, but it does have tremendous benefits. So anyway, I think I've rambled for long enough, and I think I probably have got the message across. I just hope that lots of you will have stuck with this and listened to the end, because I really do want to hear your stories in the comments below, and I will try and answer everyone. I do try to answer all of my comments, and if anyone's made any comments that haven't been answered, just give me a nudge and say to me, hey, I left a comment 2 months ago and you haven't responded. Sometimes comments do get lost in the they just get lost in the system, or perhaps I haven't seen them, I haven't remembered that I need to go back to answer comments. So please, if you have ever left me a comment and I haven't responded, just poke me and say, talk to me. I'm going to leave this video there now because I think that this has gone on long enough, and for those that have stuck this far, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And please subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, and also think about going and subscribing over on my website, my blog, www.funcraftstodoathome.com, because there's more free printables over there. And please watch the video on how to get those free printables if you're having trouble. Remember that they are free. I never charge. So if you click on a link that asks you for credit card information, click off that immediately, because that means that you've accidentally clicked on an advert, as I explained in the beginning. But I know not everyone watches all of my videos, so sometimes people miss what I actually say, and I can tell from the comments that people make that they haven't watched the whole video because they're asking questions that have actually been answered in the video. So what else is there to say? Yeah, that's about it. I'm going to be back soon with more free printables. Obviously I will continue to do the free printables for paper bead strips, but I'm also going to be adding more free printables in that people can use in collage and other crafts. So I'm going to say goodbye now, and I will see you in the next video, and enjoy your crafting, and have a think about what I said about how we can speak out to try and get the neurotypical world to consider how, particularly for the sake of autistic children, we need to get the neurotypical world to consider us beyond being different. They really need to change their attitudes to try and understand us a bit more, because I'm sure as hell fed up with trying to understand them. Okay, so take care everyone, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.